Okay, for this lesson, this first one, we're going to do some review stuff. You guys were working on factoring quadratics before we got out of school, and we're just going to review that. It's a pretty important topic in math. You're going to use it in just about every math class from here on out. So we're going to review that before we move on to some other stuff. So basically, we're going to do a chapter 8.1 review. But before that, I'm going to teach you guys how to use Mastery Connect. And Mastery Connect is where you guys are going to take your little online quizzes. They're not necessarily a quiz. I won't always put them in as a quiz grade. It might just go in as a homework grade. But those are there so that I can check your understanding, because I didn't really want you guys to submit pictures of your work. I figured that might be a little tricky. So we're going to try this at first and see how it works. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that first. So I sent you all an individual student ID, and that's what you'll need for Mastery Connect. This first page that it takes you to, when you click that link on the email, which is student.masteryconnect.com, this is where it's going to take you first, and this asks you for the test ID. So each quiz is going to have a different test ID, so you have to look at that email to see which one you're going to put in, and you're going to type that in, and then you're going to press next. And it should take you to another page that looks almost exactly the same, but it says student ID, and that's that ID that I gave you that you're going to type in. After you submit that, it's going to take you to this page. This is our first kind of quiz that we're doing. And over here on the right hand side, these are not the right answers, you guys, so please don't input these in your quiz. I just randomly selected some. That's where you're going to put your answers in, and on the left hand side, that is where the actual problems show up. Now you can see up here on this one, it says it has page 1 of 2 up. This one only has 10 questions, the second page is just blank, but sometimes you will have to scroll down to be able to see the second page to answer those questions, or you can press this arrow over here to get to the second page. When you are done, you'll click the finish button, and this screen will pop up, and you just need to click submit my answers. It's just so that you guys don't accidentally click finish and then you can't go back and do the right answers. Now this is the most important part of this whole entire thing for you guys. And this screen is going to pop up when you're finished, and it's going to tell you how many you got correct. I just guessed them, so I happened to guess one right. But this is super important over here where it has the red dot and it says remediation. If you get a red dot, I shouldn't see it on your account before you have sent me an email. If you get a red dot, I expect you to send me an email and say, hey, Miss Withers, I'm super confused. I got a red dot. I need help. That means that you didn't do very well on it, and I need to help you on those concepts. That's your chance to get help from me. And I should see you guys taking responsibility and saying, hey, I need help if you get that red dot. If you get a green dot, that means awesome, you've mastered that skill. So mastery. If you get a yellow dot, that means that you're on the right track, and you may need a little bit of extra help, but you're probably doing okay. Just make sure that on the next lesson, when you do the homework and things like that, if you have questions, that you ask me those questions, because there could be little points that you're confused on that you need help with. So make sure you ask me for help if you need help if you get a yellow dot. If you get a red dot, you should be sending me an email. Okay, the problems we are going to use for this review of quadratics is from 8.1.3. I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you want to look at the book and you need some more help or anything like that, 8.1.3 is kind of what I'm pulling from, but it also covers 8.1.2 and 8.1.1. We are actually going to skip the first one and come back to it. So we're going to factor this second one, B, first. where it says, factor each quadratic expression below if possible. Use a diamond problem and generic rectangle for each one. Right now, you guys, I understand you're at home with your parents, and this is kind of a different way than your parents probably learned how to do this. So if your parents are trying to help you on this and they're doing it a different way, that's awesome. Definitely listen to them. Use your resources. I'm not there to help you guys all the time on this. You can email me and ask me questions and things like that, but I'm not going to ding you for not doing it the exact same way that we're doing it here. This is just the way our book teaches it, so that's the way I'm going to go through it with you guys. But if you're doing it a different way with your parents, that's awesome. That's just fine. Don't worry about it being a different way than we learned, but definitely make sure you watch this and make sure you know these things, because our book does wrap back around and make some references to this stuff. So either way, just make sure you guys are getting it. If you have questions, make sure you ask me. So first we're going to factor 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. Now there's one thing I want to point out before we even start doing these. There is a difference between factoring and solving a quadratic. So this isn't obviously an equation, so we couldn't solve this yet, right? So this one, it's just factoring. So we're going to do factoring. Now sometimes you guys are going to get problems where it says to solve the equation. So if we have 2x squared plus 5x plus 3 equals 0, we can solve for x in that. But in order to solve for x, we have to factor this first. So this is going to be solve. We are going to do both of these because your little quiz problems ask you to solve for some of them will ask you to factor, and your homework problems are the same way. They're going to make sure that you know the difference between the two. So let's start with factoring. And if you remember from what we did in class, we start out with factoring these by making a box. Now in this bottom left-hand corner, we're going to put our first term. So this first term goes in the bottom left box, so 2x squared. In the top right box, let me change colors really quick. We're going to put 3, which is our last term. So first term and last term we fill in right away. Then we need our x. These are just our diamond problems, remember? And to get this top part of our x, we're going to multiply the first term and the last term. So this should be 6x squared. So this is 6x squared if I multiply those. To get the bottom of this diamond, that's just my middle term. So my 5x. Now these are your diamond problems, and remember that you had to figure out what you needed to put in those right and left hand boxes to be able to multiply it to the top. So you have to multiply to 6x squared, and you have to be able to add to 5x. And if we think about this, let's list our factors of 6. So we have 6 and 1 and 2 and 3. We know they have to multiply to a positive 6, and they have to add to a positive 5. If we're multiplying to a positive 6, that means we either need to multiply two negatives to get a positive, or we need to multiply two positives to get a positive. So that means we're going to have to use 2x and 3x. Because 2x times 3x is 6x squared, 2x times 3x, or 2x plus 3x is 5x. If we use the 6 and the 1, we'd have to make the 1 negative to get 5x, and if we did that, then we would get negative 6x squared. So the 6 and the 1 do not work. Now we just need to fill those in our other box. So I'm going to take them over here and write 2x and 3x. This is the part where this is just a generic factoring rectangle. So on this top row, I can take a 3 out of both of those, that whole top row. 3 goes into 3 evenly, and 3 goes into 3x evenly, right? So if I take 3 out of 3x, now I am left with just x. If I take 3 out of 3, I'm left with just 1. Now on the bottom row, I can take a 2 and an x out of both of those. If I take 2x out of 2x squared, I'm left with 1x still. And if I take 2x out of 2x, I'm left with 1. Now if you look at our columns, this is what we want. See how our columns have the same thing in them now? That's what we want. That's a really good thing. So now our common factor, our greatest common factor is x and 1. So this gives us our factors. This is our final answer. I'm going to take these factors and write 2x plus 3. And I'm going to take the other factors at the bottom and write x plus 1. Those are our factors. So remember when we would have stuff and it would say write it as a product and a sum? So this would be the product and the sum would be our original, which is 2x squared plus 5x plus 3. Now let's do the other piece of this, which is this right-hand side, which says solve the equation. So we already factored it. Now let's solve it. So we know that this equation up here, this is the sum. Let's go ahead and write it as the product instead of the sum. So it would be 2x plus 3 and x plus 1. And it equals 0 still. It's still an equation. I just got that from down here. This was what we already did. So if these two things multiplied together equals 0, that means one of them has to equal 0. So I'm just going to write 2x plus 3 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. I just took each of those pieces because we know one of them has to equal 0 if when they're multiplied they equal 0, right? Now I'm just going to solve that. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, and I get 2x equals negative 3, and divide by 2, and I get x equals negative 3 halves. Over here I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 1. Now when we have two solutions like this, see how they're both written as x equals? There's a better way to write this, and that is by using these curly brackets. You don't have to be super precise about them. They are kind of hard to draw. I know that. And you guys have used these before, but just as a reminder, this means, so it means solution set. So this means you have a set of solutions. So we are going to say our solution set is negative 3 halves and negative 1. And when you write these down, you should try to write them in those curly brackets from least to greatest. So we did that. We would say negative 1.5 is less than negative 1. And this would be the whole thing. That would be your answer. So this answer over here on the left-hand side, those are our factors if it asks you to factor. If it asks you to solve, these are our answers. Remember, it has to be equal to 0 to solve. Okay, I want you to pause and take a look over this and make sure you have it written down. On these videos, if I write something down, you should be writing it down too. So make sure you have this because the next problem I'm going to have you guys do on your own. Okay, this is problem A, and I want you guys to write this down just like I have it on your paper, And then I want you to pause this video and I want you to try this problem completely on your own first. Remember, you should get 2 factors down here for this one, and then you should get a solution set down here for this one. So go ahead and pause and try that. Once you press play, I'm going to have my work up there with my answers for you to check. It's super important that you try this first. Don't just copy down the answer, because it's not going to do near as much for you as if you were to try it. Maybe you'll get stuck, but then you'll press play and you'll get to see where you were stuck and learn from your mistakes. Okay, here is my work for my problem that I did. So I want to point out a few things on here that might have been some tricky areas for you. So first of all, on the factoring side, remember this top diamond box, that is these first two, the first number and the last number multiplied by each other. So that's how I get 9x squared. Remember that this bottom one comes from the middle term. And then the biggest thing is make sure you're sticking to your rows. So I found my factors this way and my factors this way. So on the top, the biggest thing I could pull out of those two is a 3. On the bottom, the biggest thing I could pull out of those two is an x. Then I have to do my columns. The biggest thing I can pull out is an x, and the biggest thing I can pull out is a 3. And then I just write those down at the bottom, and I get x plus 3 and x plus 3. We can also just write this, you guys, as x plus 3 squared. That means I have 2 of those, right? Just like 2 squared is 2 times 2. 4 squared is 4 times 4. It just means whatever is inside of those parentheses is multiplied by itself again, which is what we have. Now on the solve side, I'm going to go ahead and just write them both out. So I wrote x plus 3 and x plus 3. I just replaced it in my original equation because we found out those are the same things. Just now we can solve it. And I went ahead and solved for x, and this is where I threw you guys a little bit of a wrench. So you do get -3 for both of them. And we've done this a little bit before, but I don't know if you guys remember it. When I have that solution twice, notice down here how I wrote multiplicity of 2. So when I write that, I said MULT. That's my abbreviation, so that means multiplicity. Multiplicity just means I have it more than once, and then you're going to say how many times you have that solution. So we have that solution 2 times. So we would say -3 is our solution with a multiplicity of 2. If we had 5 factors that were all the same, I would say -3 multiplicity of 5. Okay, let's go ahead and try C now, which is x squared plus 5x minus 7. You're going to start off with a box, just like you always do. And we're going to do x squared and -7. Those are my first and my last terms. Then I need my diamond, and I multiply these for the top, so -7x squared. I take this one for the bottom, which is 5x. Now we need to figure out which of 7's factors are going to add to 5. So if I were factoring a larger number, I would write a factoring table out like this, and I'd say 1 and 7. There are not any other factors of 7 because 7 is a prime number. So that means I can only work with 7 and 1 to get 5. I cannot get 5 in any combination with 7 and 1. So that's a good sign for you guys. If you have done this factoring table, if none of those work at all with positive and negative combinations or anything, that means this is not factorable. And that is exactly what you would write on your homework. I don't think there's one like this on the quiz, but it's something that you guys need to know, and there might be one like this on your homework. Okay, I am going to walk you guys through D again just so that you have one more really thorough example. And this one and the first one we did are going to be kind of your in-depth examples that you can look back at. So make sure you guys are paying attention and make sure you're writing this down in your notes. So we're going to factor again and we're going to solve. Remember that solve means we have an equation, so it's equal to 0. We're going to have a solution set for the solve. And we're going to have factors for the one that we are factoring. We're going to start out with a box, just like we always do. And my first term goes in this box, the bottom left one. My last term goes in the top right box. And now I need my diamond. I'm going to multiply the first and the last term to get the top of the diamond. So that would give me negative 42m squared. And the bottom is my middle term, which is just m. Now this is one that I would suggest using a factoring table on. So we have 42. 1 times 42 is 42. 2 times 21 is 42. 3 times 14 is 42. 4 does not go in evenly. 5 does not go in evenly. But 6 times 7 is 42. Now we need to figure out which combination with positives and negatives we need to be able to get just m at the bottom. So I don't think I'm going to be able to get that with 1 and 42 because they're just too far apart to just get one m. 2 and 21, still too far apart. 3 and 14, still too far apart. 6 and 7 are one number apart though, and we need a positive one. So that means our 7 is going to have to be positive, and we're going to have to minus 6 from that. And remember, we need our m with each of these. So 7m times negative 6m is negative 42m squared. If I do 7m minus 6m, I do get just an m. So these are correct. You should be checking those to make sure they're right before you fill them into your box. So I'm going to do negative 6m and 7m. On my top row, I can pull a 7 out of both of those. And if I do that, I'm left with just an m here. Negative 14 divided by 7 is negative 2. On my bottom row, I can pull out a 3 and an m. If I do that, I'm just left with an m here. And if I do negative 6 divided by 3, I am left with negative 2. And then I took out my m, so there's no more m's left. Now see how my top first column and my second column are the same thing now? That's what we want. So we have an m and we have a negative 2. So that would mean my factors are 3m plus 7 from this left-hand side. And from the bottom, I have m minus 2. Those are my factors. Now let's do the solve part. So I'm going to rewrite my original equation with my factors. So I have 3m plus 7 and m minus 2, and it needs to be equal to 0 if we're going to solve. So I just took these factors and I replaced those in my equation. Now I need to set each of them equal to 0, so 3m plus 7 equals 0, and m minus 2 equals 0. I'm going to subtract 7. And divide by 3. That's one of my solutions. And I'm going to add 2 to this one. And I get m equals 2. And that's my other solution. Negative 7/3 is the smallest, so I'm going to write that one first. And then I have my solution of 2. Both of these only pop up once, so I have no multiplicities. Okay, we are going to go through a couple of special cases now. And if you notice, all of these kind of look a little bit different than we're used to. So this problem says, most quadratic expressions are written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. But what if a term is missing? Or what if the terms are in a different order? So those are the questions we're going to kind of answer. If there's a term missing, you have 0 of that term, right? If they're out of order, you can just rewrite them in the correct order. So we're going to go through and fix all of these if they need fixing. So on A, I have 9x squared. So I have an x squared term, but I don't have any x's. If I don't have any x's, that means I have 0 x's. So I'm going to write plus 0x and then minus 4. You guys should be able to factor that. Now the second one, for B, I have x squared, so 12x squared, minus 16x's, but then we have plus 0 at the end. We don't have a constant term at all. For C, my x squared needs to go first, so I'm going to do 8k squared, and I always cross it out if I've already written it, minus 10k, and then plus 3. And you should be able to factor that. This last one, I'm going to go through with you guys a little bit, because this last one is actually a lot simpler than you think it is. I can just pull something out of here right away, so I'm just going to pull out my greatest common factor. My greatest common factor in both of these is 20. If I do 20 times 2, I get 40. And then if I do 20 times negative 5, m, I get negative 100m. That's the factored version for that one. So if we wanted to solve it, I would do 20, 2 minus 5m equals 0. That would mean 20 equals 0. That can't happen, right? That's not a real solution. And we would have 2 minus 5m equals 0. So I would subtract 2 from both sides to get negative 5m equals negative 2 and divide by negative 5. So I would get m equals 2/5. And I would just write that in my curly brackets. That would be my solution. Okay, now I want to go through A with you guys so that you can see the answers, but I want you to pause it right here. Try A on your own, try factoring and solving it. When you press play again, it's going to have my solution with my work and everything on there so that you can check your work. For B and C, I'm not going to show you my work. I'm just going to have the answer for you to check your answer. So it's super important you try this one on your own before you just look at the answer. Okay, I circled my answers in yellow for you guys because on the solve side I kind of ran out of room. One thing to pay attention to, on the solve side, I got negative 2/3 and 2/3. Those are still two different solutions, so make sure you don't write multiplicity of 2. You just list each of them. And then on the right, or on the left-hand side, we have 0x. Make sure you check that 6x minus 6x is 0x. And when I multiply them, it is negative 36x squared. So make sure you guys are checking that stuff when you are filling that in. Go ahead and check your solutions and then switch to the next part. Okay, now the last thing I want you guys to do is do problems B and C, and I'm going to give you the answers right now so that you can check your answers. So you should get 4k minus, whoops, not plus, minus 3 and 2k minus 1 for C. And B is a little different. So B you should get 4x, oops, I'm going to erase this, you guys, 4x, and then you should have 3x plus 4. You could have 4x plus 0 here. That's the same thing. But make sure you guys pause this, do those problems, have that work in your notebooks, and then restart it and check your answers and keep going. Okay, there is one last special case that I want to point out to you guys, and this is super important because if you don't watch this part and pay attention to this, you will not get it correct on your quiz. So make sure you pay attention to this. So this is a special case. If I have 10x squared minus 16x plus 4, and it's equal to negative 3x, that is not equal to 0 like our other problems were. If I go back here and look at this problem, you're going to see that it was equal to 0, right? Every single time we did these, they were equal to 0. On this problem, it is not equal to 0. So we need to make it equal to 0 first. So that is the key. So to solve, the equation must equal 0. To get this equation to equal 0, I'm going to have to add 3x to both sides. Whoops. So then I'm going to have 10x squared minus 13x plus 4 equals 0. And you would solve that equation just like the other one. So now, solve. This is literally one of your quiz questions on one of those quizzes. So make sure you have this written down. The last thing I want to tell you guys, it is on the email, but your homework is problems 29, 30, 31, 32, and 33. Please make sure you're emailing me and asking me questions if you have questions on this stuff. I can also set up a Zoom meeting with you. So if you email me and I'm like, oh, this is too hard to explain over an email, I might have you set up a Zoom meeting with me so that I can explain it to you on a Zoom meeting. And with the Zoom meeting, I can share my screen so I can write it down just like this with you guys so that you can see kind of how to do it. So please make sure you're communicating. With us doing online school, it's going to be a little tricky to do some of these new math topics. This one's kind of review, but you guys haven't done it in a while, so it's super important you ask me questions if you do have questions. That's the end. Make sure you're following my email and going through it exactly the way that I have it. Let me know if you have questions.